welcome for Dr. Bruce Fife.
I'd like to thank NTA for inviting me. I like coming to events like this because it's really fun to be with people who understand the importance of nutrition and foods in good health. I'd like to start off by asking you, what disease do you dread the most? What disease would you least like to encounter in your life? That is for me too. But most Americans say that Alzheimer's is their second most dreaded health fear, just behind cancer. And there's good reason for that, because Alzheimer's is a terrible disease that takes away a person's personality, their ability to think, to reason. It takes away their ability to talk, eventually walk. And so it's an awful disease. Each year, 260,000 Americans are diagnosed with dementia each year. Alzheimer's is by far the most common form of dementia. 1 in 8 people over the age of 65 and half of those over 85 have Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's usually occurs sometime after the age of 60, but in some cases it occurs earlier, in persons' 40s and 50s. This is called early onset Alzheimer's. It's bad enough to get Alzheimer's in old age, but to get it in midlife can be devastating. Of the 5.3 million people who have Alzheimer's in the US, over 500,000 have early onset Alzheimer's. Another 600,000 people under the age of 64 have mild cognitive impairment, which is a precursor to Alzheimer's. And as you age, your risk of Alzheimer's increases. In fact, age is the biggest risk factor for Alzheimer's. However, age does not cause Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is not a part of the normal aging process. Alzheimer's is a disease, just like cancer or diabetes. The brains of Alzheimer's patients are much different from the brains of elderly people who age normally. In Alzheimer's patients, the brain has a high degree of degeneration and damage. People can and do live long, healthy lives without ever encountering Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is considered a terminal illness. It's the 7th leading cause of death in the United States. Doctors have no clue on how to stop it. They have no clue on how to prevent it. They can't even agree on what causes it. Drugs used to treat Alzheimer's can't stop it, let alone reverse it. The very best they can hope to do is to slow down the degeneration, the process of the disease. Studies have shown that this slowing down effect is so small, so tiny, that it makes absolutely no difference in a patient's day-to-day activities. Also, this effect is only seen on half the patients that take the drug. In the other half, there is absolutely no change whatsoever. And in those people that do show some effect, this effect wears off after 6 months to 12 months. After 12 months, 100% of the patients show absolutely no benefit whatsoever. Now, when you consider the adverse side effects associated with Alzheimer's, which would include nausea, headaches, dizziness, hallucinations, mental confusion, muscle wasting, seizures and death, you're going to think, is it really worth it? Doctors are aware of all this. They know that most of the patients that they give these drugs to don't benefit whatsoever. They also know that after 6 to 12 months, it doesn't benefit any of their patients. Yet, they prescribe these drugs to all of their Alzheimer's patients, and they continue to prescribe them year after year after year until the patient dies. Why is that? Because they have nothing else. They have nothing else at their disposal to treat Alzheimer's. Medical science has failed horribly when it comes to Alzheimer's disease. Conventional medical wisdom considers Alzheimer's to be an incurable illness. Simply because there are no drugs that can treat it doesn't mean it's hopeless. There is a treatment for Alzheimer's, and it doesn't involve drugs, and it doesn't involve surgery. It involves diet, nutrition. And the basis of this diet is coconut, specifically coconut oil. Coconut oil-based diet has been able to stop Alzheimer's and reverse it. And in some cases, it has completely eliminated it. Now, the success of the treatment depends on the severity of the case, how long the person's had it, and how closely they follow the treatment program. Now, I've been studying coconut and writing about coconut for many years. I've written many books on the topic. And over the years, people have contacted me and they've expressed to me how coconut oil has helped them or family members overcome various neurological problems, including Parkinson's disease, epilepsy, ADHD, depression, autism, and Alzheimer's. Some years ago, I was contacted by a doctor from Florida. Her name was Mary Newport. Many of you have probably heard of her. Her husband, Steve Newport, had Alzheimer's, and she explained to me how she was able to successfully treat him using coconut oil. Now, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at the age of 53, and had had Alzheimer's for 5 years. He used to be an accountant, and his wife described him as a computer whiz. He could take apart a computer, fix it, and put it together again. But with Alzheimer's, he lost all of that. He lost the ability to type on a keyboard. He could no longer read. He couldn't even spell simple 3-letter words like out or put. He was forgetting family members' names. He couldn't dress himself properly. He would put on a shoe and a sock on one foot and go around barefoot on the other foot. And since his wife was a doctor, from the very beginning, she had him on all of the Alzheimer's drugs. And he went through all of them. They did absolutely no good. He continued to get worse, and she was getting worried. And she became desperate to help him. And so she started looking into experimental drugs. And she wanted to enroll him into studies that were evaluating these new experimental drugs. So as she was looking through, evaluating some of these drugs, she found one particular new drug that showed great promise. Preliminary studies had shown that one dose of this drug actually showed some reversal in Alzheimer's symptoms. No other drug has ever done that before. So she was really excited to enroll him in this pilot study. So before he could actually participate in the study, he had to go down and he had to take a test called the Mini Mental State Exam, MMSE. And this is a standard test they give to Alzheimer's patients to evaluate their degree of dementia. There's 30 questions. The questions in general are pretty simple. They're like, what day of the week is it? What city are you in? Things like that. If you can answer 25 to 30 of those questions correctly, that's considered normal. 20 to 24, mild dementia, 11 to 19, moderate, and below 10 is severe. He took the test. He scored a 12. This is almost in the severe dementia range. He scored so poorly that he was rejected from the study. He was considered beyond hope, were hopeless, and they were sent home. They felt really bad about that. But Dr. Newport had been doing a lot of studying on this drug, and she happened to come across the patent application for this drug. It was a thick bunch of information there that had preliminary studies, had the science outlined of how the drug worked, and interestingly enough, it had the ingredients of the drug. And she found out that it really only had one active ingredient, and that ingredient was medium-chain fatty acids derived from coconut oil. Coconut oil, or all fats and oils, are made of fat molecules known as fatty acids, and there's different types of fatty acids. You can put them into three categories based on their size or the length of their carbon chain. So you have long-chain fatty acids, medium-chain fatty acids, and short-chain fatty acids. The vast majority of the fatty acids in our diet consists of long-chain fatty acids. Probably 95 to 100% of the fats in your diet consist of long-chain fatty acids. Coconut oil is unique in that it consists primarily of medium-chain fatty acids. And it's these medium-chain fatty acids that give coconut oil most of its medicinal properties. Since this new drug had not been FDA approved, it wasn't available for sale yet, the Newports couldn't buy it and use it on their own, but they could buy coconut oil. So Dr. Newport went down to her health food store, bought a jar of virgin coconut oil, brought it back. She calculated how much coconut oil she would need to give her husband to equal the amount of medium-chain fatty acids they were using in the study. It came to 2.5 tablespoons. So the next day, she put 2.5 tablespoons of coconut oil in her husband's oatmeal. This was 2 weeks after he had gone down and he was rejected for the study. So 2 weeks after he had the MMSE test. So he had that in the morning. That afternoon, they had an appointment with the doctor. They went to the doctor's office. The doctor had Steve retake the MMSE test. This time, he scored an 18, which is unheard of. Alzheimer's patients always get worse. He scored a 12 2 weeks before, and now he had scored an 18. This proved to the Newports that they had stumbled on something incredible. Another interesting thing happened at about the same time. The day before he started the coconut oil, he had another doctor's appointment. And in this doctor's appointment, the doctor had Steve do what's known as the clock test. And this is another standard test they have dementia patients do to judge their severity of dementia. And basically all it is drawing the face of a clock by memory. So Steve drew a clock, and that's what it looked like. His mind was so far gone, he couldn't even remember what a clock looked like. The neurologist told the Newports that Steve was now entering the severe stages of dementia. Well, the next day he started on his coconut oil, 2.5 tablespoons a day. He did that for 2 weeks, and then he retook the clock test. You can notice the vast improvement. It's starting to look somewhat like a clock now. The only change was adding 2.5 tablespoons of coconut oil. He continued with that. 2.5 weeks later, he retook it. Again, it's looking more and more like a clock with just the addition of coconut oil. That's Dr. Newport and Steve and the clocks. So over the next year or so, if they continued with it, she actually increased his amount of coconut oil he was receiving. He continued to improve. He started to remember family members' names. He started dressing himself properly. He relearned regained the ability to read and regained the ability to type on a computer keyboard. He was getting back onto the computer and surfing the internet like he had done before. He was feeling so good that he was even volunteering his services at the hospital where his wife worked. He said that before he started taking coconut oil, he was like he was in a dark, closed room. He couldn't see, he couldn't think clearly. It was all black around him. When he started taking the coconut oil, it was like turning on a light. He could see clearly again. His mind can see clearly again. He could think clearly again. He says, with coconut oil, I've got my life back. He retook the MMSE test about a year later, scored a 20, which is in the mild range. So he was going from, in a year's time, from entering severe dementia, and now, after a year, he was entering mild dementia. He was reversing dementia. No drug has ever done anything close to that. Now, Steve isn't the only one that's had experiences like this. There are lots of other Alzheimer's patients that have incorporated coconut oil into their diet with similar success as Steve has. So, in order to understand how medium-chain fatty acids affect Alzheimer's, we need to understand what's going on in the Alzheimer's brain. Recent medical research has identified Alzheimer's as a form of diabetes. Brain diabetes is now referred to as type 3 diabetes. Diabetes is caused by a defect in blood sugar metabolism. When we eat food, some of that food is converted into glucose or blood sugar and sent into the bloodstream. And our cells use glucose as their fuel to produce energy. However, we must have insulin in order to access the glucose. Insulin opens the door on the cell membrane that allows glucose to get in. Insulin is absolutely essential for the cells to get access to glucose. Your bloodstream could be saturated in glucose, and if you don't have insulin, your cells can't get access to it. And without glucose, your cells starve to death. They degenerate, they die. This is what leads to many of the complications associated with diabetes. There are two major types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. In type 1 diabetes, the body doesn't make a normal amount of insulin. In type 2, the body may make a normal amount of insulin, but the cells have become unresponsive. They become resistant to the action of insulin. So more insulin is needed in order to get the job done. And this is called insulin resistance. And 90% of diabetics are of this type. They're insulin resistant. Type 2 diabetics are at very high risk of developing Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is insulin resistance of the brain. The brain cells cannot effectively absorb glucose, so they begin to starve, degenerate, and die. As the brain cells die, the brain begins to shrink. As the brain begins to shrink, the person loses cognitive ability, memory, and eventually personality. Glucose is the primary source of energy for all the cells in the body. And we get glucose primarily from carbohydrates in our foods. If we don't eat for a period of time, such as between meals, when we're sleeping, when we're fasting, blood glucose levels start to fall. However, all of our cells need a continual supply of energy in order to function properly. And so when blood glucose levels start coming down, the body mobilizes stored fat and releases fatty acids. And the fatty acids then can feed our cells much like glucose. So in this manner, our cells have access all the time to either glucose or fatty acids to supply the energy it needs. Now, this process works really good for the body, but it doesn't work for the brain. The brain cannot use fatty acids to supply its energy needs, so it needs an alternative form of energy. And that alternative form is known as ketones, or ketone bodies. Ketones are a high energy source of alternative fuel that are made in the liver specifically to feed the brain. All the cells in the body, except for the liver and red blood cells, can use ketones for energy, but they're made specifically for the brain. So when we're not eating anything and glucose levels come down, it triggers the liver to start producing ketones, and blood ketone levels go up. And they'll remain elevated until we eat, primarily if we eat carbohydrates, Then blood glucose levels go up, and the liver stops producing ketones, and blood ketone levels come down. And in this manner, the brain always has access to either glucose or ketones. Now, ketones are known as superfuel for the brain because ketones actually provide much more energy than glucose does. It's kind of like putting high-performance gasoline in the tank of your car. You get more power, better gas mileage, and less wear and tear on your car. Ketones have a somewhat similar effect on our brain and on brain health. In Alzheimer's disease, the brain cannot effectively use glucose. It cannot absorb it. And so when glucose levels are high, the brain is literally starving to death and degenerating. Ketones, however, the brain can absorb ketones. It doesn't need insulin in order to absorb ketones. Ketones are easily absorbed into the brain cells. So whenever ketone levels are high, the brain is like a gasp of energy, breath of fresh air when ketones come in. I kind of use the analogy of a person who can't swim. He's in the middle of the ocean. He's bobbing up and down, trying to get a breath of fresh air. When he's underneath the water, he can't breathe. He's holding his breath. He's suffocating. That's the same as when glucose is in the bloodstream. The brain is starving. And when ketones come in, it's like him bobbing up out of the water and grasping a breath of fresh air. The longer he can stay above water, the longer he's going to live. And if he can't stay up, then he drowns. This is why you can have an Alzheimer's patient who is somewhat coherent at one moment, and then an hour and two after a meal, they're completely incoherent. Now, ketones have 4 major effects on brain health. First one is they provide a high-potency alternative fuel to glucose. Ketones are essential for brain survival, everyone's brain survival, not only for good health, but for survival. Ketones increase blood flow to the brain, improving circulation and oxygen delivery to the brain. Ketones activate certain proteins in the brain called brain-derived neurotrophic factors, which regulate brain cell growth, repair, and function, which allows the brain to heal itself and to calm inflammation. And fourth, ketones provide the basic building blocks for new brain cells. Believe it or not, much of your brain is made from ketones. During the 3rd trimester of pregnancy and the first several months of life after birth, this period of time is known as the brain growth spurt. This is when the human brain grows the most. The fetus at this time is in a state of ketosis, high blood ketones. And the reason for this is the fetus needs the ketones to build brain cells. After birth, the infant remains in a state of ketosis for several months, again, to build brain tissue. Ketones' effect on the brain are so important, I want to briefly review these 4 effects. First, they provide a high-potency fuel for the brain. Second, they improve oxygen delivery to the brain. Third, they activate processes that protect, repair, and maintain brain function. And fourth, they provide building blocks for new brain tissue. You know, at one time it was believed that we were born with all the brain cells we'd ever have throughout our life. But research has shown that's not true, that even very old people still develop new brain cells. So this is important. So even people with brain problems can develop new brain cells. So for these reasons, ketones can have a very pronounced effect on brain health. And can be used therapeutically to treat brain disorders. Now, ketone therapy is nothing new. Ketone therapy has been used for 90 years to treat brain disorders. Back in the early 1900s, they used fasting as a treatment for many hard-to-treat health problems, such as cancer, arthritis, and digestive problems. One of the health problems that responded very well with fasting therapy was epilepsy. When people were put on a 20, 30-day fast, eating nothing, consuming nothing but water, seizure activity was reduced dramatically with long-lasting effects. The reason for this is, since you're not eating anything, the body's continually producing ketones, 24 hours a day, day after day for 20 to 30 days. So the brain is relying on ketones as its primary source of fuel. This has a very pronounced effect on brain health, and it corrects defects in the brain. Doctors noted that the longer they could keep their patients on a fast, the better the results. However, there's a limit to how long someone can be on a fast. And so they devised a diet that would mimic the metabolic effects of fasting, but still allow the patient enough nutrients to maintain good health. And that was called the ketogenic diet. The ketogenic diet proved to be very successful in treating even the most severe drug-resistant forms of epilepsy. It had been successful for many years. And because it had been successful for a long time, researchers started wondering, well, how about other neurological problems? Could the ketogenic diet help with that? So they tested it on Parkinson's disease patients, Huntington's disease patients, ALS patients, those with traumatic brain injury, stroke, and Alzheimer's. And what they found was that in every case, the patients had significant improvement. Now, the classic ketogenic diet limits carbohydrate consumption to about 2% of total calories. And that is necessary in order to produce a therapeutic level of ketones. Now, most people consume about 60% of their calories as carbohydrates. So when you take all that out, you have to replace it with something. With a ketogenic diet, you replace it with fat. Fat is necessary to provide the building blocks for ketones. The problem with the ketogenic diet is that preparing meals and eating meals that are 85 to 90% fat was a challenge. So this is where coconut ketones come in. When you eat coconut oil, a portion of the medium-chain fatty acids in coconut oil are automatically converted into ketones regardless of blood sugar levels and regardless of what other foods are in the diet. You can raise blood ketones to therapeutic levels by simply eating coconut oil. So with enough coconut oil, any diet basically can become a ketogenic diet. Medium-chain fatty acids have proven to be far more effective in treating Alzheimer's than any drug currently used. For example, in one study, they took a group of Alzheimer's patients and they gave them one of two drinks. They gave them one drink contained medium-chain fatty acids, and the other drink contained the typical long-chain fatty acids. 90 minutes after the drink, they ran the patients through a series of cognitive tests. They discovered that those that had the drink with the medium-chain fatty acids scored significantly higher in these cognitive tests than the other group. Now, this study was remarkable for three major reasons. First, this supplied clinical proof that medium-chain fatty acids had a significant positive effect on Alzheimer's patients. Second, the effect was almost immediate. Within 90 minutes, the patients were scoring better on the test within 90 minutes. Third, the effect was seen after a single dose of the medium-chain fatty. Didn't take 10 doses, 100 doses, or 1,000 doses. Didn't take 6 months or a year to show the effect. One dose, 90 minutes, was a measurable improvement in brain function. Now, there's not too many good sources of medium-chain fatty acids. The best source comes from coconut oil. There are many things that can contribute to Alzheimer's. Now, doctors like to say that Alzheimer's is caused by genetics, but that's just an excuse they give when they don't know what causes a disease and they don't know how to treat it. Alzheimer's is not primarily caused by genetics. It's caused primarily by environmental dietary factors. And so we're going to go over some of the major contributing factors to Alzheimer's. First one would be high carbohydrate, refined carbohydrate, high sugar diet. This is probably the biggest contributing factor to Alzheimer's. Refined carbs and sugar are stripped of their nutrients. They're basically empty calories. A diet that has a lot of these type of foods push out more nutritious foods from the diet that can lead to nutritional deficiencies. Well, the brain, just like any other organ of the body, needs good nutrition to function properly. So poor nutrition is going to obviously affect brain health. Sugar also depresses the immune function, and so with a lot of sugar in your diet, your ability to fight off infections, to detoxify toxins in the body, and to maintain good health is seriously affected. Sugar and refined carbohydrates increase blood sugar levels, which leads to the formation of advanced glycation end products, which causes damaged tissues. It promotes inflammation and accelerates premature aging. High-carb diets also promote insulin resistance, as well as diabetes, and as well as brain diabetes, Alzheimer's. High-carb diets lead to chronic low blood ketone levels. This is very important to understand. High-carb diets lead to chronic low blood ketone levels. If you're eating carbs, you are not producing ketones. Let's say you eat a high-carb diet, even what would be considered a somewhat healthy high-carb diet. Let's say for breakfast you eat oatmeal in the morning. For lunch you have a chicken salad sandwich, probably with white bread, maybe even with chips or fries on the side. For a snack, you have a granola bar, maybe coffee and sugar. For dinner, you could have pasta, pizza, rice, bread. Well, if you eat like that, you're eating high carbs. And so your glucose levels are going to be high all the time. You're not going to have a low enough glucose to produce the ketones your brains need. If you eat like this day after day, year after year, eventually you're going to develop insulin resistance, so that even after a night's sleep without eating anything, even when you're fasting, you're going to have high blood glucose levels, and you will never produce enough ketones to have any therapeutic effect on the brain. Let's look at an analogy. Let's say you go to the dealership and you buy a brand new car. If you take care of this car, you change the oil filter, change the oil regularly, rotate the tires, this car is going to easily last you 100,000 miles. But let's say you neglect the maintenance. You never rotate the tires, you never change the oil. What's going to happen? The engine's going to seize up. It's going to break down. Our brains are like these new cars. If you take care of your brain, it's going to last you 100,000 miles or 100 years, whichever comes last. Ketones act like mechanics that come into the brain and do the daily maintenance. They change the oil, they change the air filter, the fuel filter, they rotate the tire. They keep the brain running the way it should so it can last 100,000 miles. Again, keep in mind that your brain does not produce ketones when you're eating carbs. So you don't have these mechanics coming in and doing the maintenance. So your brain wears out. Inflammation can cause insulin resistance. Chronic inflammation in the brain can cause brain insulin resistance. Anything that causes brain inflammation, when combined with a high carbohydrate diet, can lead to Alzheimer's. That's very important to understand. So let's go over some of the most common causes of brain inflammation. Trauma. Trauma anywhere on the body causes inflammation. Trauma to the brain, of course, is going to cause brain inflammation. So bumps, hits on the head, sporting events, things like that can cause inflammation. Inflammation or trauma ignites inflammation, and a high-carb diet keeps it alive. Trauma is like lighting a match, and a high-carb diet is like kindling added to it. You can keep inflammation alive forever with a high-carb diet. Other causes, drugs. A lot of drugs can cause oxidative stress, which leads to inflammation in the brain. Just recently, there was a study that came out that showed that antidepressants such as Prozac and Zoloft causes hemorrhaging in the brain, bleeding in the brain. Well, hemorrhaging is always associated with inflammation. Other types of drugs that can cause inflammation used to treat high blood pressure, colds and allergies, pain relief, excessive stomach acid. Some of these you see all the time. You see them advertised on TV all the time. Another big one would be cholesterol-lowering drugs. It has a very negative, pronounced effect on brain health. This little list is just a very small sampling. In my book, I list a couple of hundred drugs, common drugs you see all the time that cause brain inflammation. Unfortunately, doctors typically prescribe these type of drugs to older people, which are the worst group to prescribe them to. Environmental toxins, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, industrial waste, and pollution can affect the brain. We also got food toxins, otherwise known as food additives, such as aspartame, MSG, nitrates, nitrites, food dyes, can all cause brain inflammation. Toxic metals, aluminum and mercury are probably the two worst because we're exposed to them in many ways. Aluminum we get in cookware, food additives. They're used in anti-caking agents, in table salt and baking powder. Drugs contain some, for example, the aluminum and mercury is found in vaccines. Aluminum is also in antacids like Maalox and Rolaids. It's an antiperspirant. Mercury, many people are exposed to mercury primarily through dental amalgams. The so-called silver fillings are actually mercury fillings. They're 50% mercury, and this mercury is continually leaching into your body and into your brain, causing inflammation 24 hours a day. Any type of infection is associated with inflammation. Of course, infection in the brain is associated with inflammation in the brain. Infection in the brain can be caused by bacteria, viruses, fungi. A common infection is herpes, the type that gives you the cold sores on your lip. Once you're infected with the herpes, you have it for life. It hides out into your nerve cells in the face. When your immune system is low, it will come out with a breakout, and you get the sore on your lips. But in the nerve cells, it can migrate back and get into your brain and infect your brain. What's interesting about infections is they don't have to be in your brain to cause brain inflammation. Any infection in your body can cause brain inflammation. So an infection in your gums, gum disease, colitis, the flu, any type of inflammation. So hemorrhoids, arthritis, you fall down and hit your hip, any source of inflammation. The reason for this is because at the source of inflammation, you're releasing pro-inflammatory proteins. They get into the blood, they circulate. When they get into the brain, they spark an immune response, which is accompanied by inflammation. So any inflammation in your body will cause brain inflammation. There was an interesting study that was published in the journal Neurology, and these researchers followed a group of Alzheimer's patients for 6 months. They evaluated them with cognitive tests before the study and then after the study. They found that if these patients suffered from the flu or a cold during that 6-month period, their rate of mental decline doubled. So just getting the flu doubled caused inflammation in the brain. Also, they found that patients that had some source of chronic inflammation, like arthritis or colitis or gum disease, their rate of decline was 4 times faster. Finally, they also discovered that if those patients who had a source of chronic inflammation also caught the flu during that 6-month period, or a cold, or fell down and hit their hip, their rate of mental decline was 10 times faster. So the more sources of inflammation they were exposed to, the greater effect the inflammation in their brain and the greater the decline of mental ability. So anyone who eats a high-carb, high-sugar diet and exposes repeatedly to conditions that cause inflammation are at very, very high risk of developing Alzheimer's. Let's go back to our new car example. Let's say you drive your new car off the lot and you run over a nail, but you're busy, you got places to go, people to meet, and so you keep on going, you don't bother to fix it. What's going to happen after a while? Well, eventually the rubber is going to tear off and you'll be driving on your rim. Well, let's also say that, again, you're busy, you're running out of gas, so you need to fill up. So you've got places to go, people to meet, so you go to the first gas station, Harry's Discount Gas, and you fill up. Well, unbeknownst to you, it's contaminated with a little bit of water and a little bit of rust. But you go off on your way. What's going to happen after a while? Well, this water and rust is going to get in the engines and you're going to break down. So if you took the car in, if you took the time, took the car in to the garage, had the mechanics do the repairs, replace the tire, blow out the carburetor and clean out the gas tank, your car would be just like a brand new car. It'll give you 100,000 miles on it. The nail, the contaminated gasoline, are equivalent to inflammation. We're always exposed to inflammation in our lives somewhere or other, through drugs, through environmental toxins. Every one of you, all of us, we can't avoid a lot of this. We can't avoid much of it, but some of it we just can't. But we can go to the garage and get all of that cleaned out of our brain. We can get rid of the inflammation in our brain by allowing the ketones to come in, the mechanics to come in and do their job. So there's 3 ways you can increase your blood ketones. One is to do periodic fasting. Even if it's just to skip 1 or 2 meals at a time, periodic fasting. Another is to cut down on carbohydrates, and particularly at dinner time. If you have a low-carb meal at dinner time, so you'll burn off your carbs quickly so that you'll get your ketones producing. Another way is to eat coconut. Add coconut into your diet, particularly coconut oil. Now, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go through some of this a little bit quickly here. Coconut is the ultimate brain food, the ultimate brain food. Coconut, when you put it into your foods, it helps regulate blood sugar. It slows down the absorption of blood sugar into your bloodstream. It also improves insulin secretion and insulin sensitivity. So it's good for diabetics or those people who are pre-diabetic and helps prevent those conditions. Coconut oil provides a source of medium-chain fatty acids that are converted to ketones. Well, ketones are literally brain food, so coconut oil is literally a brain food. And the ketones, again, help stimulate healing and repair of the brain. Ketones also have antimicrobial properties, help to kill bacteria, viruses, and fungi. They can kill bacteria that cause various diseases. These are a few of those documented in medical literature. With fungi, here's a few, again, that are documented. And influenza, viruses. Coconut oil can also help block the effects of many toxins, many environmental toxins. These are a list of those documented in medical studies that coconut oil or medium-chain fatty acids can neutralize. Coconut oil can also help boost immune function, so it can help in detoxification, not only of chemicals, but also of heavy metals. And so coconut oil can help counteract a lot of the causes of brain inflammation. How much coconut oil do you need? I recommend that people, for maintenance, do 1 to 3 tablespoons a day would be good. If you have Alzheimer's disease, then I recommend a therapeutic level, which would be 5 tablespoons a day. This has proven to be very successful in treating Alzheimer's disease. Now, some people will say, well, I've added coconut oil into my husband's diet who has Alzheimer's, and I haven't seen the fantastic results, or the results haven't been as great as I expected. Well, there's some reasons for that. One is, when I ask them, how much coconut oil did you give them, they'll say, 1 or 2 teaspoons, or 1 tablespoon. No, 5 tablespoons or more. Another reason they might not see the results they want is because they continue to take drugs, cholesterol-lowering drugs, Alzheimer's drugs. Well, some of the symptoms of these drugs are mental confusion, hallucinations, memory loss. What does that sound like? It sounds like Alzheimer's. These drugs can cause the symptoms that are attributed to Alzheimer's. And so if you get them off, then you can see the improvement. It's not that coconut oil isn't working, it's the drugs are causing the problems themselves. Another problem may be if someone has a severe case of dementia or has had it for a long time, there is going to be some permanent damage that you just can't reverse all of it. Most anyone will improve with coconut oil added into their diet. The amount of improvement will depend on how severe the case is. And finally, if the person continues to eat the high sugar, high carb diet that caused the condition in the first place, you can't expect to see the phenomenal results that others experience. You need to get off these type of foods. So what type of foods should they be eating? Natural foods, whole foods, combined with a low carb approach. That would include lots of fresh fruits and vegetables, healthy meats, dairy, eggs, good fats. Need to avoid processed fats, hydrogenated fats. You need to avoid processed, canned, packaged foods, particularly those that are high in sugar. Use coconut oil every day. The best way to do that is any recipe that calls for margarine, shortening, vegetable oils, just replace it with coconut oil. And with any recipe that doesn't have oil added to it, add it. If you have soup, stew, casseroles, curries, just add it. Like butter. You put butter on your vegetables, you put it on your bread, you can put it in your oatmeal. You can do the same thing with coconut oil. You can add coconut oil to any type of food, even to beverages. People put it into their hot beverages, tea and whatnot. So you can add coconut oil to anything. If you want to learn more about the science behind medium-chain fatty acids and their effect on brain health, I recommend my book, Stop Alzheimer's Now. I also have recipe ideas, how to use coconut oil, and the program on how to approach Alzheimer's patients using diet and coconut oil. Now, this approach isn't just for Alzheimer's. It works with most every type of brain condition. So it's good for Parkinson's disease, ALS, Huntington's disease, MS, and those type of things. It's also good for neurodevelopmental conditions. In fact, I have a whole book on that one, which just recently came out. Same basic theory, ideas with the ketones repairing the damage that's in the brain. The approach with children is a little bit different because it is geared toward children, but the basic concepts are the same. If you would like to learn more about coconut oil, how it affects our health in many, many different types of ways, I recommend that you come visit my website at coconutresearchcenter.org. There's lots of articles on there, nutritional facts, hundreds of medical studies. I mean, I don't invent this stuff. There are actually studies on this stuff, and you can read them, access them there. There's news on what's happening in the world of coconut. If you ever thought there would be news about coconut, yes, it's there. Thank you very much.